Painting black armor sounds easy, right? It's just black. But it's actually one of the more challenging colours to get right, and in this video I'll show you how to make black armour look real with natural highlights and subtle weathering without adding any of those harsh cartoony edge highlights. I'm Nate the Feral Painter and welcome to the Grimdark Compendium. The main focus of this video is to give you some simple and effective techniques that you can use in your miniature painting to render black armor just using basic oil methods, soft pressing and variations in surface finish. So before we get into the painting portion of this video, I'll first go over the build that I did with these models. And when I first started looking at the Ravenwing models, two things sort of stood out. One, there wasn't much choice and the older kits looked pretty outdated, and two, the bikes just looked way too small next to the newer Primaris Marines. So to bring this vision that I had to life, I decided to mix things up and combine a couple of kits. The chaplain on a bike was perfect for my vision. It's bigger, beefier, and it made a solid foundation for me to build upon. And from there I started to add parts from the additional Ravenwing kit to really nail that look down. There is a little bit of cutting and tweaking to get everything to fit right, but nothing too crazy, and you can also repose things a little bit in the arms if you wanted to get more of a stoic or a dramatic stance. And since these kits are pretty similar, weapons and details blended together quite nice. Adding little touches like chain, copper wire and random spare bits to really help sell the idea that these bikes have been personalised and battle worn. But one of my favourite parts that I really enjoy when crafting miniatures is the base, and you can go quite simple with this, but just adding some little bits of cork and some pipes and a few little extra details can completely change the look of your project. But make sure that you are picking a colour scheme that complements your model, and it'll just really help make everything come together. And as I always say, I like to treat my base as its own little miniature project, and just adding a little bit of effort here and there can make a massive difference. But once you've got everything built up, you can then go ahead and prime your miniature in your favourite black primer. Now for this next little section, you'll notice I have gone over mine with a zenithal grey primer. This is purely just for explanation purposes, so that it's easier for you to visualise and follow along. Now what I want to talk about is, because we've primed up the miniature first of all in black, but we've done that for a very specific reason before we even start painting, so I can come in and do some soft pressing. Now, whereas soft pressing is typically done with a needle or a paper clip or just a very sharp tool, for this I'm going to be using a scalpel. We wouldn't normally recommend this for soft pressing if it's the first time that you've tried it, just I've got a little bit more control with the actual scalpel. So first of all, I'm going to in there, just with the weight of the tool, just very softly, I'm going to start to scratch through that existing primer that we've just put on. Now that's not going to go down to the bare plastic straight away, because we want some of the lighter scratches, and then I'm also going to come in there and press on just a little bit harder, just to be able to create some physical indentations in the actual plastic itself. Now when we're painting black armor, this is a really good place to start, because we can start to distress it before we even begin to paint it, and these little scratches will act as a guide a little bit later on for the weathering. But it also adds some natural weathering elements into there, because armor, especially when it comes to the black armor, it's going to give us some more visual interest to look at. But also when these miniatures, or if they were real, they'd be driving through, they'd be kicking up stones, getting stone chips, battle worn, hitting things, and also getting lots of different damage from years on the battlefield. So just work your way around with the soft pressing, and if you want to press on a little bit harder to pull some little chunks out of the plastic as though it's really chipped that metal, you can do that as well. But one little tip I can give you, if you do find that your soft pressing or your scratches are a little bit too harsh or a little bit too hard, you can soften them slightly using Tamiya extra thin cement, and just brushing this lightly over it will just help soften those marks up. After that, Make sure you do give it a very slight dusting off to make sure you've got rid of any debris or anything like that. And then to finally finish everything, we then need to go ahead and reprime the miniature again, just to fill in some of those little scuffs and marks that we've done. And this black will also be the base for our black armor. Now, depending on what primers that you use, you may want to go over this with a different black because some have different finishes. Ultimately, my aim is to be more on the satin to glossy side to really get some of that shine through. And I've specifically chosen the Kaleido Colorworks black primer. It's not too matte and it's not too glossy, it just sits really nice in between. It's a nice foundation for us to be able to work on. But if you don't have these or access to these, you may want to go in there with a black paint that's a little bit more, it's not too matte and it's not too glossy, it's more on the satin side. And now comes the fun part, which is painting and building up that black armor along with the weathering. I have never been a fan of the traditional Games Workshop way of painting black armor. Those heavy edge highlights just really don't make sense to me, and they can look harsh, unnatural, and honestly kind of cartoonish. So instead, I'm going for a much more natural, realistic, and easier approach. I started by mapping out my highlights using a dark grey sprayed from above to catch the areas where the light would naturally hit. I thin the paint in my airbrush by 2 drops of thinner for every 1 drop of paint, and this thinner mix just lets me build up the highlights slowly and stay in control without overdoing it. But don't worry if you do go a little bit too far, as the later stages will help tone everything back down. And this step is really just about mapping out the light and dark areas and setting up a guide for what comes next. But once that is dry, we're going to move into a little bit of dry brushing / stippling, and for this I'm just going to grab an older brush, ideally one that's got one of those round dome tips, and I'm going to use that same grey colour, but this time I'm going to thin it 1:1 on my wet palette. I then start stippling it onto the armour, and this will just create some small textured marks and tiny imperfections, especially on the lighter spots where the light would naturally hit. It is quite subtle, but it adds a lot of realism, and it's a nice visual, interesting noise to look at when you do inspect the miniature even closer. Now at this point the acrylic work is done for now, and it's time to move on to some oils. And oils are great, they're super versatile, easy to blend and very forgiving. A lot of people do tend to shy away from using them, but they really do open up so many options once you get comfortable with them. For the oils, I put out some black, white and a few rust tones on a piece of card. Cardboard really does help soak up that extra linseed oil, which makes them dry faster and gives a nice matte finish as well. I do thin them slightly with mineral spirits, and I start to loosely sketch in that black into the shadows. Don't stress too much about exact placement. One of the best things about oils is that you can move, remove or blend them out with ease. I also do add a few small dots of the black oil paint into those grey highlight areas that we've just done, and once blended, these will just create even more mottling and natural wear and tear. But once you've put your black oil into place, I'm then going to take a clean brush, just very lightly moistened with mineral spirits, and start buffing and smoothing everything out. And when blending, make sure to push that black oil up into the grey highlights that we've just done right at the beginning, and this will just create some smooth transitions between the light and shadow areas. And those random little dots that we placed as well of the black earlier will also help with that mottling in the chips and the wear and tear. And it'll also, with that buffing with the oils, it also results in a much more softer worn effect as well. So once you've completed that stage, this is what I like to call my base coat. So this is the main foundation of the black armor that we can now start to build upon. I'm now going to mix a very small amount of the white oil paint in with the black, and I'm going to apply this using the same oil dot filtering technique as before, just avoiding those shadow areas. That slightly lighter mix does add a little bit more of that mottling and subtle distressing to the armor that I keep going on about, but just place these small dots randomly and then you can blend them in with a clean brush. You can also repeat this step or adjust it until you're happy, but just remember, being subtle is the key here, and you can even turn some of these into some additional scratches. Now we do run into a little problem with the oils at this stage for the end results that I'm after, because when the oils dry, they will dry more on the matte side. Now that's not a bad thing, it's just we need to do a little bit more work to be able to get to that black armor that I'm after. And for this build though, I've wanted the armor to have a more of a softer satin sheen, where it looks shiny but it's not too glossy at the same time. But what you need to do is make sure that your oils are dry. You can speed up that drying time of the oil just with a hairdryer, or you can just wait around 20 to 30 minutes before spraying on 2 thin coats of satin varnish. Now normally we wouldn't varnish before adding any additional oils or enamels, but in this case it is going to make sense when we get towards the end, and we want to create that difference in that surface finishes across the entire armor from satin and matte and gloss. But by applying these 2 thin coats of the satin varnish, it's going to do 2 things. One, it locks the oils in and gives the armor that nice shiny sheen that I'm after. But there's also a reason that I don't let the oils fully cure before this step. And since the satin varnish does sit atop of those slightly uncured oils, you can then go back in once that satin varnish is dry and do some further soft pressing or scratching to reveal those layers underneath. But once that varnish is dry, I just gently start to distress a few areas and add that little extra layer of wear while keeping that satin look intact, just like we did right at the start. This time, I'm only using that soft pressing very sparingly. It is worth just briefly mentioning as well to apply those transfers before you actually do the satin varnish. A little mistake that I made is I put the transfer on after and then applied another layer of satin varnish, which incidentally just actually toned down a little bit of the work that we've previously done on the rider himself. So it's just taking that into consideration when varnishing your miniature. It's just to do 2 thin even coats, as you don't want to like ruin any of the previous work that you've done. I just wanted to take this quick moment to say that if you are enjoying this video and want to learn more, then head to the Grimdark Compendium. We've got a full catalogue of courses, Villainy Ink sets and course bundles, including the new current Lords of Chaos bundle. This bundle includes both the Night Lords and Emperor's Children courses, each one featuring 4 episodes. And included in this bundle are 3 bottles of Villainy Ink, Goon's Grime, Decrepit Filth and Caput Mortem. And if you're enjoying this Ravenwing video, you can also check out the full version over on the Grimdark Compendium, where I go into depth with the full build, basing and painting process. This is actually the 3rd part in our Dark Angels series, and it's also the best way that you can support us and the work what we do here. Turning now to a dark silver like Iron Warriors, I use this to add some small chips and touches to the bolts and scratches. This is just enough to suggest that exposed metal, but just make sure that you are going quite easy here, as you don't want to overdo it at this stage, but it'll also work as a very subtle edge highlight without that harsh cartoonish look. But adding these little small metallic chips just adds that extra layer of weathering and realism to this armour. So at this stage now we've had all the previous work done. We've also added that satin varnish to give it that sheen, and then we've added some additional metallic chips. Now at this stage we do need to come back to the oils and enamels to add some additional weathering. And for this I'm going to start with Villainy Ink Phase 2 Decrepit Filth, and this is an enamel that's perfect for adding some natural dirt and grime to your miniatures. I focus it on the lower areas of the armour and inside some of the recesses where it would naturally build up. And I know typically we wouldn't be really applying these dark enamel washes to dark armour, so it wouldn't really make sense because of the contrast and it wouldn't really show up. But just on other areas around the vehicle, if there's any metallic sections, these are areas where, you know, the Decrepit Filth would make sense as just some additional grime around the miniature, and especially on the golden trim. And after a small removal pass using the reductive technique with the Decrepit Filth, I followed this up with the rust tones of the oil paint that I put out on my palette a little bit earlier, and I'm just going to use these to add some additional streaks and some wear and tear and some additional corrosion to the armour. These will also dry matte, which contrasts really nice against that satin armour, giving us that perfect surface finish variation. Some finishing touches now, and to tie the model into its base and add even more realism, especially for vehicles that would naturally kick up dirt and dust like this. I thinned down some Villainy Ink All Is Dust, and I use my finger and a brush to spatter it across the lower parts of the model as though that dirt has kicked up onto the actual bike itself, and I also let some of this flow into the tyre treads as well. But All Is Dust is from the new Phase 2 Villainy Ink, and this is a great enamel that dries very much like Decay of Death, where it dries really matte and chalky, and you've got a number of ways that you can apply this, as well as either some additional weathering around your bases, or even just to desaturate some colours that you have around your miniature as well, and it can be applied via brush or airbrush. And to finish it off, I added a light dusting of some pigment powders to blend everything together with the base. Obviously these last few little steps is all dependent on your basing scheme, and these are some optional extras that we do advise when creating and tying everything into its base. And that brings this tutorial to an end. So I'm just going to quickly recap what we've done and why. Now I know it might seem like we've added a lot more layers and stuff like that we would additionally, but ultimately these additional layers is what really fetches this armour to life, along with those like natural chips and mottling that we've done right at the beginning, and then adding that satin varnish to get that perfect surface finish variation, which will also catch the light as well with that satin varnish on the edges without negating the fact that we need all these cartoonish edge highlights. So if you have enjoyed this tutorial and do want to see the full build basing and painting process, just as a quick reminder, you can also go over and check out the full Ravenwing course over at the Grimdark Compendium. With all that said, I've been Nate the Feral Painter, and I will catch you in the next video.